Lady Cudlipp, Rector, ladies and gentlemen, staff and students of the university. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the annual lecture in honour of Hugh Cudlipp, as Sandra has said, that remarkable proponent and chief architect of popular yet responsible British tabloid journalism, dedicated to explaining often complex social issues of the day, but in a lively and compelling way. All our lecturers have shared something of Cudlipp's sense of mission in that respect, his sense of energy and conviction. And this evening's lecturer, Jon Snow, the main presenter of Channel 4 News, comes with a formidable reputation for conveying the news with clarity and compassion, but with verve and humanity and an overriding sense of justice and fair play. In fact, Jon's biog is almost too good to be true. Descended from the ranks of the English ruling class, of bishops and generals, he didn't allow his privileged beginnings to dissuade him from protesting in his student days, which led to his rustication. Our students may have to look that word up, from Liverpool University, where he was reading law. Nor did it stop him developing an acute sense of social injustice by working with VSO in Africa and for young down-and-outs in central London before becoming a trainee at ITN. Once he turned his focus to journalism, he was a fast riser, becoming Washington correspondent and then diplomatic editor, before becoming the face of Channel 4 News back in 1989, a rise to fame achieved with little more than a decade, so astronomical in those terms. After numerous industry awards for his slick yet accessible style, which was particularly popular with the young, he declined an OBE for services to journalism because he didn't believe that working hacks should be the recipient of gongs. So, well-bred, principled, brilliantly successful, yet with a disarming humility, suave, handsome, irresistible to women, don't you just hate him? And those ties. As you can see, I consulted my wardrobe this morning without any luck whatsoever. But of course we don't hate him, and I, for one, particularly feel absolutely no envy because he remains actually a superb reporter, which I believe is the fundamental basis of all effective journalism. We were crossing our fingers, obviously, tonight that a major story wouldn't break because we strongly suspected we'd lose him. In fact, all our attempts to meet were cancelled because he's either been in Rome covering the troubled euro or in CERN explaining the birth of the universe. Anyway, it's a cliche. It's a cliche to say that journalism is at a crossroads, but it's one that is difficult to resist, quite frankly. We live in an age of dangerous calls for press regulation, of a collapse in the business model that has supported our trade since its beginnings, and some would say its standards, and a seemingly unstoppable development and pace of new technology available to every man. It is with this exciting but a challenging landscape as our reality, that we welcome Jon Snow to shed some light on the future. Thank you, Jon.
Fellow students, we have a job on our hands. We're going to go and look for this guy. It's not me. Thank you very much for that very, very kind introduction. Lady Cudlipp, the Cudlipp trustees, the staff and students of the London College of Communication, you're very generous to have invited me, and I must say I'm extremely excited to be here tonight. And you lot up there in the other lecture theatre, I'm even more excited to be able to see you. Virtually, anyway, I mean, kind of. How timely that we should be celebrating the life of so legendary and pivotal a figure as Hugh Cudlipp, a man who inaugurated one of the finest periods of tabloid journalism. The nearest I ever got to Hugh Cudlipp, beyond shaking the hand of his dear wife, Jodie, who's present with us tonight, which is lovely, wonderful, no older than when I last saw you 3 years ago, was to be employed at LBC by his nephew, Michael Cudlipp, who literally told me to get on my bike and become a proper reporter. So how apt that we should be paying obeisance to an emblem of a golden age of tabloid newspapers in what is inescapably the darkest and bleakest moment this end of the industry has ever known. It is salutary to think of what Hugh Cudlipp achieved and to wonder what he would have made of today's tabloid leadership. And what a life. Leaving school at 14, becoming a peer less than 50 years later in recognition of an unbelievable life lived. I feel hugely honoured to be allowed to speak in his memory tonight, and hugely honoured to follow in the footsteps of Michael Grade, Andrew Marr, Alistair Campbell, Alan Rusbridger, Lionel Barber. I may have left a couple out. Tonight, thank goodness you got the joke. Good, good. You sharp-witted people. I'm going to have to be bloody careful tonight. Right, excise that bit from the online. Tonight, I want to focus on the art, the trade, the power of journalism in print, on screen, online, and beyond, and the breathtaking opportunity that is beckoning us all on into this golden age of journalism. Tonight, I want to context where we are going by briefly establishing where we've been. My anticipation of the golden age will not eschew the downsides we have all suffered and will all suffer along the way. Let me make a confession. I have never worked in print. I've written for the Times, the Telegraph, the FT, the Mail, the Independent, the Guardian, the Spectator, the New Statesman, and this week, my climax, the Radio Times. Just in case you want to know, it's because I got a terrific part in Coriolanus. And in all those organs, I wrote with joy and fulfillment. Charles Wheeler once told The Observer that as a TV journalist, he felt a sense of inferiority in the face of print. And I know exactly what he means. There's still something magical about actually seeing your work on the printed page. But such dalliance does not qualify me to pontificate about the state of tabloid journalism. You've been there already. That although I love print, and even though I started in radio, my experience is television. My life today is multi-platform. So I want to start with the journey since Hugh Cudlipp's day. I arrived in journalism as he left it. Joining ITN in 1976, I was in time to see Harold Wilson out of Downing Street in an era when, well, some of us still went down there accompanied by a silent wind-up bell and howl camera, superb lens, but only a minute of film at a time. It tells you something about the journey deference has made since then. We were not expected to shout at the Prime Minister, not even on the one occasion when we seriously needed to. Prime Minister, your pocket's on fire. And it actually was. He'd failed to put his pipe out. And the left hand pocket was fuming away. There were billowing smoke coming out of his pocket. He was completely oblivious. By 1977, we were beginning to perfect the quick-fire, if cumbersome, live news inject. But it wasn't without its problems. I was sent to report President Jimmy Carter's first visit to meet Prime Minister James Callaghan. I managed to engineer with Tom McCaffrey, his delightful pressman, that if at all possible, Carter and Callaghan would come out live during our 15-minute news at 5:45. Tightish order. Standing outside Lancaster House, I was strangely exclusive because reporters had indeed been excluded. Only technicians for the generation of live pictures had been permitted. But I'd got dressed up as a techie, and Tom McCaffrey, once he detected what had happened, allowed me to get away with it. So I did a live inject at the top of the news wearing techie jeans and a polo neck sweater. Not exactly the clothes to be addressing the President of the United States, but there was no Carter. At 1 minute to 6, the editor of the day, David Phillips, took a gamble and crossed back to me. 20 seconds later, Carter walks out. I shout what nowadays would be a banal cry. Mr. President, you are live on British television. He and Callaghan strode over to me, and now with 15 seconds to the end of the news, madman that I am, I asked him a question, and he begins to answer. Now, network television in those days was an extremely complex and protocol-strewn operation. You could never, ever overrun without weeks of negotiation, and even then you couldn't. And quite suddenly, the network engineers had to decide whether to throw the switch on the President of the United States of America. Only Yorkshire Television did. I'm very glad to say, to vast complaint, amazingly, from their viewers. The other channels stayed with me. By 6:10, 10 minutes overrun, we'd become a 25-minute bulletin. We handed back to the network, having completed a live 10-minute interview with the President of the United States. And when I got back to ITN, naturally enough, there was champagne flowing. There was always champagne flowing, really, to be absolutely honest. They were champagne days. Everyone was pissed half the time. But anyway, there it was. And suddenly, the proceedings were interrupted by a telephone call on the landline, of course, because there was no mobile. And there we were up in the bar, and I took the call, and it was Channel Island Television, Channel Television. My action, I was informed, had trashed their entire evening's programming of recorded television programs, every one of which was now running 10 minutes late, out of kilter. "It must never happen again," barked the furious manager. So I retreated and had another champagne. But if things were tricky at home, they were even tougher abroad, which is where I largely made my reporting home. We were still on film. It was colour. That was a breakthrough. Any of you out there that are watching in black and white, I'm wearing green. Communications, all communications, were extremely difficult. Telex was our mainstay, thumping out perforations that somehow coalesced into words the other end, or so we believed. Live was thankfully impossible. Same-day reports, for the most part, were impossible. And from Africa, where I worked a lot, next day was all but impossible. So things took a very long time. Hence, we would spend much more time preparing the report. We reporters would have to make copious notes on every single shot the cameraman took. And then you would toil for hours trying to write a script to all these illegible notes that you'd made out in the battlefield. And you would try to write a beautiful script to pictures you couldn't see, but had seen and now had to remember. So it was quite an art. And then there would be still more time taken shipping it, often bribing a passenger or a crew member to carry it on British Airways. $100 was the going rate. It's quite a lot. And even when it got back to ITN, there would still be the 3 hours in film development, processing and having a smoke and having a coffee, and the thing would drift on into 4 hours, and then there would be this very complicated edit in which somebody would try and stitch what I'd said together the picture. Do you think he means that shot there or that one there? There was a big debate always. 3 days after the event, my report would hit the airwaves to enormous acclaim. But if you distill it, the actual time we spent on journalism was no more than we do today, maybe even less. Sitting in Uganda, there was no Google, no ready comparative source, no means of checking anything other than what you had actually witnessed. Those reports were actually gripping. One pair of eyes, not 40 or 50 as today, where you had them spliced in. You get a bit from CBS and a bit from CTV, and whoever it is, and it makes a nice sort of melange of reporting, but you haven't actually witnessed any of it. None of that. We had witnessed it all, and the story would be ours, but it would be very tightly focused, and we could often be wrong. Our understanding of the news, perhaps, was deepened by being there, but it was finite. We could only do what we could do. Today, for example, a local minister might tell us one thing, and we could check, build our findings into the report, and yet still root it in Uganda as part of our tradition of being witness on the grounds to events. Contrast, therefore, my very first reporting from Uganda in 1976 with my most recent foreign assignment in 2011. That first report on the ground in Uganda dealt with the horror of Amin. It was graphic, and because I was not constrained by immediate live deadlines and the rest, I did have time to hang about and try to grab an interview with the tyrant. That was the upside, time. But I had little mechanism for developing any sense of how the story connected with the outside world, the UN, Westminster, and the rest. How was anyone else reading Amin outside? Well, of course, actually, in fact, They were reading, I mean, quite correctly, very bloodily and very, very dreadful and the rest of it, but he didn't feel quite so bloody and dreadful close too. That was a big problem, because he would come swaying into the room in a Stuart tartan. He had enormous knees. And, I mean, this tended to take your mind off the fact that he'd probably just changed out of another uniform which was drenched in blood. If you were very lucky, you'd hear a very badly distorted BBC World Service. We were so completely on our own compared with today. Of course, it did spare the endless calls from the office. Sky, I have an interview with a woman whose children have been fed to crocodiles. Can you try to find her? You never had any of those. Never. And contrast that with my most recent major foreign assignment in Cairo's Tahrir Square, where I tweeted, blogged, reported, fed the bird, and then anchored that night's Channel 4 News, live from just outside and overlooking the square. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. Mind you, with the pressures of time, some of the fun has gone out of it. I well remember going in search of a prominent Ugandan exile who had just fled Kampala for his life in Kenya. Together with my cameraman, Mohinder Dillon, we found him in a remote Maasai village. But the BBC's late lamented Brian Barron was hard on our heels. We dashed into an open tea shop and crouched beneath a table with our prey and watched Brian's Toyota Land Cruiser steam past in a cloud of dust. No time for that sort of thing these days. By the late 1970s, someone had come up with lightweight video, or ENG, electronic news gathering equipment. And suddenly, video as we'd known it was no longer stored on 2-inch videotapes, which took more than a man to carry, but in little cassettes. Lightweight was a complete misnomer. It was as much as a three-man crew could carry. Very, very heavy. And everybody was tied together with a vast umbilical cord the size of a gas pipe. In 1978-79, I was posted to Rome. I suddenly became a foreign correspondent. It was a year of 2 dead popes. The story was a nightly feast of colour, intrigue, tradition, absurdity, quick turnaround, white smoke, and more. Pope Paul dies of old age. That was grand, because the funeral was terrific. There was a collision of big Italian cardinals as they tried to become pope. They all knocked each other out, and the simple second division devout Archbishop of Venice became Pope John Paul I. He lasted 33 days. Some thought he died of stress, others thought he'd been murdered. We tended to the view that he'd been pressured to death by a corrupt and reform-resistant curia. Either way, it was a terrific story. Why, even the body of Mr. Calvi of the Banco Ambrosiano turned up hanging from the bridge of Blackfriars right up the road here. It was all such fun. And all amazingly accessible on video. News was speeding up. Our journalism could barely keep pace. And then we had God's gift, a whole new round of intrigue with the first Polish Pope. There we were in the dying embers of the Cold War. We didn't even know they were dying, but this man was actually going to fan the old embers and get them kicking. It was an amazingly inspired intrigue to get a pope from the Eastern Bloc, and we knew it. We thought the CIA had fixed it. I think they probably did. Cardinal Kroll of Chicago, look out for him. Polish-born, once bragged that he had worked for the CIA. I remember the white smoke. I mean, what a wonderful thing as a journalist to have a video camera on the white smoke. Well, the white smoke had come many times before. I mean, for however many centuries it is, 8, 9, 10. But there were we, live with a video camera, filming white smoke. When was white smoke such fun? Habemus Papam, shouted a very fat prelate from the dais. His name is Karol Wojtyła. Good God, whispered the AP man next to me. They've elected a woman. Suddenly, we were on his travels, down Mexico way, calling in on Santo Domingo. I had managed to get the first ever interview with a pope in English on the plane. It was a bit of an ordeal, to be absolutely honest. He could speak 18 languages, and he went round the plane solemnly speaking each of these languages, was never good at any of them because he hadn't spoken them for long enough to get into his stride. But I'd got an interview with him. We were on film again because neither Mexico nor the Dominican Republic could yet handle video. We were on separate sound and vision. So I had to do a clap before the interview. Holy Father. He was very bemused and wondered whether something had gone wrong with the language. But even so, we could never sync the tape with the film, even though we'd got the clap and everything else. And in my exasperation at the end of the evening, I took the spool and hurled it into the ocean. What an idiot! In the digital age, we could have retrieved that, we could have put it back again, and we could have had this first ever English interview with the Pope. But it's down to me that is sitting at the bottom of the ocean off Santo Domingo. Well, anyway, we were evolving very fast. And yet, in 1985, when the Challenger shuttle crashed, killing the crew and the first teacher in space, Christopher McAuliffe, I witnessed it, watching the TV on the racks in our office in Washington. We turned to each other as the plumes tumbled to earth. We knew it had gone. "Book the satellite now!" I screamed. And in that moment, we beat the BBC to the 6 o'clock news. We had secured the only route out. The other one was relaying a live hockey match from Germany. Ice hockey. In those days, we beat the other guy simply by booking the satellite quicker than he could. And these days, and what a great progress this is, the race is about the best journalism. It's not about any of these strategic issues as to where you feed or how quickly or which bird, because the sky is awash with facilities. And anyway, we can send it all by email in a matter of minutes. So by 1989, when the Berlin Wall came down, we thought we'd cracked it. Well, not the wall, but the technology. But we hadn't. I was on the western side of the wall. Nick Gowing was on the other. But for some reason, the microlink between us decided to offer him to us upside down. And it's a big test. Should you take him upside down anyway, just to prove you can do it, or not do it? And I'm afraid not doing it won. But I was all for putting him on upside down. Sometimes Nick Gowing made more sense upside down anyway. Well, then we reach, I'm going to come on to what I really want to say tonight. I just thought I'd amuse you before I really reduce you to tears. Well, that same year, 1989, part of me came indoors, and I left the road. That intoxicating daily mix of new faces, new places, new information gleaned by me alone and ordered in a way I wanted it, had given way to a different kind of time, far removed from faces and places beyond the familiar ones that people, a newsroom and a studio. Suddenly my contact with the people was incoming in the form of occasional letters in green ink, underlined in red. I had become the anchor of Channel 4 News, albeit with itchy feet to report to this day. So now I really want to turn now to why I believe we're right on the cusp of a golden age of journalism. This is where my conviction that we are poised for the golden age of journalism begins. For the first time since Caxton, Alexander Graham Bell, Marconi, Logie Baird, the entire media has been liberated. Liberated in a way that allows the reader, the viewer, the listener, the true capacity to answer back. We are in the age of answer back. Better still, we are in the age in which we, the people, have the greatest opportunity ever to influence the information agenda. But above all, we're in the age of more potential to get it right, to get it fast, to get it in depth. We have that elusive entity, the level playing field. We can compete on equal terms and yet be the best. Sure, we can justifiably be scared of we the people. Where will they lead us? We want control, order. Fear not. Our editorial control remains. It's just that we no longer live in a vacuum, unknowing of the effect of our reporting. We know more about how to interest our consumers, how to engage, and what effect what we do has upon them. I talked just now about green ink underlined with red, but now every single hour of every day, we have communications from the people who read our blogs, who read our tweets, who respond to our tweets, and who watch our main product. We can detect them switching on and off. We can see their comments surge on Facebook and Twitter. They interact, they augment, and if we're open enough, we learn. In short, the democratization of information through the web is providing journalists with an opportunity to enter the gateway to the golden age. why even our video news footage can be emailed, as I mentioned, in a matter of minutes from virtually anywhere. Okay, I can see Luke Jacobson, one of our news editors here, grimacing because sometimes it takes 3 or 4 hours when things are wrong. But in the main, it's very, very quick. No need for satellite dishes. And our mere existence has forced countries that would never allow us in the past to let us in. We can go more places faster and transmit more faster than ever before. You know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when Assad's father murdered 40,000 people in Syria, did the media get in there? They didn't. Today, we're in there. We're in there, and we're in there with the Syrian people. The Syrian people are offering us every night material on mobile phones, on any possible mechanism they can find, Skype, whatever. Is enormous courage to communicate with us and to be our foot soldiers in the fields that we cannot tread in. And then we can be on the government side and still question and get away with questioning and get away with revelation. These are incredibly exciting times. Countries, as I say, that we were never able to penetrate before are open to us. The whole of the Eastern Bloc, obviously. I mean, it's all part of us now. And even Russia. I mean, we can work. We can get there. China, the lot. The we ensures that mechanisms sustain, mechanisms sustain to exist now mechanisms now exist to politicize, to campaign, to bring together, as the Arab Spring has shown, however uncertain its outcome. Here in the developed world, individuals within corporations, civil servants within ministries are beginning to contact us, are beginning to use the discrete mechanisms of cyberspace to tell us about what's going on, to tell us about things that go wrong. Today, 3 decades into my career, I know more about what's going on around me than I've ever known, and I have the potential at my fingertips to know even more. Sometimes the information is wonky, and we pursue it, and there's no truth in it. Sometimes it's there, but to have the capacity to sift through all the material coming in is, well, that's a problem. There is so much material coming now that it's very, very difficult to keep pace with it. But it is an exciting and challenging time. God, think of the times when we had no information coming in. And it's really virtually only North Korea that we can honestly say we have no information coming in. Well, North Korea and elements of Westminster, who knows? Nowhere is it clearer than in the abuse of power. Witness the Telegraph's brilliant expose of the MPs and peers' expenses scandal. The Americans told us that WikiLeaks would result in the deaths of many agents and informers. Are we to suppose that even if one had died, the Americans would not have broadcast the fact to prove their case? How about a challenge? I put it out tonight. I believe there is no evidence that anyone has died from a WikiLeak. WikiLeaks told us what we know. The most extraordinary quantity of stuff is kept from the citizenry because it's easier that way. It is the culture, nonsensical keeping of materials secret that ought to be in the public domain and are the right of the tax-paying citizen to know. Our secretive society is being opened up. Our media society is being opened up with it. If the Leveson inquiry does nothing else, it reveals the questionable values of key elements of the tabloid press, to the grave detriment of the very fine work that is done by other elements of that same tabloid press that help keep sport, politics, and business straight. Well instanced by the cricket-fixing story and key aspects of the Stephen Lawrence investigation. The tabloid street is not one way, but when it reaches the gutter, it is devoid of proportion, care, and all too often truth. If we journalists are to cut it in the golden age, we need to be straight, and we need to toil for trust. I hate it when I get something wrong. I feel I've failed. I feel physically wounded. I feel, physically wounded, but I'm going to turn the page. I do everything possible to avoid a repeat. We all need to be more candid when we're wrong. I would even argue that being wrong, as rarely as possible, is probably an inevitable that comes with our territory. But when we are wrong, we need to put it right, publish our correction, and learn from it. We should not be shy about corrections. The New York Times has published at least a dozen or so corrections every day for the past 20 years. I argue it is infinitely more trustworthy as a result. The consumer needs to have confidence that when we are wrong, we admit it and we put it right. I believed a shadowy story 6 months ago that Piers Morgan had been suspended by CNN over hacking accusations. I rushed to tweet. I was wrong. I withdrew it a minute later, but too late. It has lived with me ever since and has informed a deeper caution and respect for a medium I'm going to return to in a moment. But this too is where regulation comes in. I want to be regulated. I want to be held to high standards. I don't want the impact of my journalism to be tainted by even a hint of questionable ethics. I think it is absolutely right that there is a regulator that people can go to. Who are we to be above the opportunity for people to review what we've done? Furthermore, I do not want to find my own editors somewhere in the mix. I want an objective regulator. I'm no Ofcom sycophant, but I'm afraid they have done an excellent job regulating my end of television. Firm, fair, intelligent. No one's perfect. I find some of the documentary Ofcom compliance irksome. But as a regulator, hatched in our present age, they've done and continue to do a remarkable job. So what are these print guys afraid of? Well, they're afraid of what I'm afraid of, which is any intrusion into freedom of speech. But if their story is right, if it's justified, they've got absolutely nothing to fear from a regulator. Even the most hardened of tabloid journalists must have been mortified, embarrassed, even shocked at the rubbish that has tipped across Leveson's desk. What age do these supposed journalists and editors who are the agents of this stuff actually live in? What lives do they live? Of course, papers and TV are entirely different beasts, and they work in entirely different ways. I mean, we're licensed, they're not. But I see no reason why print journalism wouldn't benefit from a credible regulator in the same way that television has. And that's not to say it has to be some kind of statutory regulation, but it should be independent. One of the problems that they have suffered from that is until now, the written press has not had a credible regulator. I'm not suggesting Ofcom should take over, but an independent system with its own powers to investigate wrongdoing seems an essential given what has gone wrong in the past couple of decades. It should be well over arm's length from government, exclude any serving editors from its ranks, and probably a very, 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 very long way down the line, maybe have recourse to the law to enforce its will. But I would hope that the mere spectre of the law would be enough to sort things out. And by the way, the establishment of the regulatory system should be accompanied by a wholesale abolition of the UK's current libel laws and any recasting to ensure both free speech and the rights of the individual. And I'm pretty sure the whole thing could be fixed up inside the Human Rights Act. I think it's perfectly possible to defend people, for people to defend their reputations inside the Human Rights Act. It's absolutely absurd to have this medieval instrument anywhere near the statute books. I repeat, if we can practice cutting-edge journalism on television with regulation, I see no reason why some kind of regulator, even if not of the Ofcom style, could make a huge difference. With full access for public complaint, it should be perfectly applicable to the print world too. And as somebody who has had the odd brush with the tabloid press, I have enjoyed at least one 2.5-inch, column-inch retraction and apology, and that's a thrill. The only thing is I think probably ought to be a bit bigger in future for people making complaints. I repeat, if we have good regulation, we don't even need a privacy law. It's the sensationalist tabloid stuff that has triggered the desire for a Privacy Act. I admit that I went through a phase of wanting one, but if we get the regulation right, we won't need a privacy bill of any description. So now on to something else which I think heralds the golden age of journalism, and that is what I call the demand for depth. I may hear a sigh or an intake of breath. People want depth. People want, no, they're living in completely superficial times. Not at all. Absolutely untrue. If you hear this, but you only have 140 characters, it is the cry of somebody who simply does not begin to understand the truly vast implications of Twitter. I see Twitter as a fundamental element, a signpost and more at the gateway to the golden age. Twitter leads the information thirsty to water. Twitter is a breaking news source, yes, but above all, far from being merely superficial, Twitter is an agent that is playing a key role in satisfying the desire for depth. How on earth can 140 characters satisfy the desire for depth? Because Twitter's power lies in links. For me, it is a major source of links to important articles and video, and I deploy it and I lead people to material that has augmented my own understanding of a story. But I also use it on the ground, from Egypt to Japan, from Downing Street to Brussels. I've used it to build the environment in which news is breaking. In Egypt, here's my tweet. Armed Mubarak thugs on camels plough through crowd next to me. Cool, lovely. Whatever's going on here, camels. Somebody will want to know more. They'll want to tune to Channel 4. This is all part of the deal. In Japan, I just opened door of blue van. Mother, father, 2 kids sitting inside, dead, drowned. Or more recently, this is what I want of a poet laureate, brilliant Carol Ann Duffy on Stephen Lawrence, link, poem on Guardian website. Or from Haiti, if you want to know why aid to Haiti is fading, read this, Wall Street Journal, link. Very, very good article. I mean, this is fantastic. We've always wanted people that we trust. I'm not suggesting anybody trusts me, but we've always wanted people who we trust to lead us to water. And they may not do it in their own words. They may simply give you something from Atlantic Monthly that you don't happen to take and which you don't scan online, but you're having your attention drawn to it. It's magic. It's magic. But we at Channel 4 have used Twitter to gather documentary evidence. Anyone out there know of a rogue landlord exploiting tenants? Visit landlordsfromhell.com. That edition of Dispatches attracted an audience of 2.5 million people. That's big-time people watching an hour of in-depth television. Viewers used Twitter to raise issues with the housing minister following the program. It stirred viewers to share their own housing horror stories via a dedicated YouTube site. It had real political impact. It triggered a Charity Commission investigation into housing charity, the Meridian Foundation, ongoing brackets. It led to a major debate in Parliament. MPs called for action to ensure tenants were protected from rogue landlords. Now, that's just one instance of a system which people believe is about 140 characters. It's not. It's about everything. It's about opening the door to the golden age. I recognize the power of Facebook too. For me, it's too cluttered. I rarely use it, but I know others are making it work for them and for their journalism. Deploying the social network both to gather and to disseminate in ways our journalists not even have dreamt is playing an undreamt role in our journalism. So, how do we make money out of our dawning golden age? Well, not by selling newspapers, that's clear. I believe it's unlikely many people will be turning paper pages in a decade's time. But the brands, they will live on in our golden age. Has anybody here seen what I regard as one of the very best documentaries of the 21st century? It is called Man on Wire. Anybody seen Man on Wire? A little smattering. Man on Wire is a most remarkable film about a completely bonkers Frenchman who's particularly good at walking tightropes, who decides he's going to walk the tightrope between the Twin Towers. And he has never been to America, he's never been to New York, he's never seen the Twin Towers, and I don't think he's even thought about how to put a rope between them. However, by some absolutely amazing subterfuge and absurdity and madness, he gets a large rope all the way to Manhattan. He gets into the building through the security. This is, of course, before they were brought down. He gets into the first tower. He hasn't even thought how he's going to get the thing across. It's a big gap. He gets the rope up there. He gets it across. He gets it tight. And he walks out into the middle of it. One thing, of course, he forgot was a film camera, but he did have a stills camera, thank God. And lots of people filmed him from down below, so it did happen. He made it across. And this is the allegory. The Twin Towers are us. The first tower is old media, is ITN, is the old bits of BBC, is, the Times, the Guardian, whatever. It's all the old media. And in the new building is Google, is Yahoo, is AOL, is anybody else you care to mention, Google, etc. They're all in that tower there. We haven't got a tightrope. We may not even have anybody who knows how to walk one, but we will get one, and we'll find somebody who can do it, and we will get across to that tower, because they need us as much as we need them. And sooner or later, market forces being what they are, it will work. We will find we generate money for what we do. It's a very, very painful moment. Alan Rusbridger spoke very candidly here, in his lecture here, about the Guardian's trailblazing journey from old to new media and the vast challenge of costings and income amid the transition from old to new. It's a very dangerous journey, but we've got to hold our nerve. I have one final element that I believe will augment and diversify our golden age. The speed and pace of what we're all doing is starving television journalists in particular of the opportunity to develop the stature and presence of our forebears. These were people who had days in which to prepare their stories, dominated a tiny handful of channels, and became iconic figures in the medium. It is much, much harder for journalists today to ascend the same ladder and preside with their kind of authority, and we need to afford talent, the time, the space, and the working experience to develop the authority that our medium depends upon. Time in the real world. Bosses must carve out time for journalists to get out of the newsroom. If I'm any good as a journalist, and my God, I mean, the problem with online is that sense in which you become welded to your keyboard. Your real contact with real human beings is desperately limited. If I'm any good as a journalist, it's not only because I've traveled to more than 100 countries to report. It is in part because I'm rooted in the New Horizon Youth Centre. This is a day centre of homeless and vulnerable young people. The centre is located in King's Cross. I can make a confession here tonight. I have systematically, over 35 years, with ITN and Channel 4, stolen time from my employers. A lunch hour here, a diversion on my way back from a story there, a half hour here and an hour there to go to the centre and carry out my duties as chair. I was director there before I became a hack. It is fortunately 10 minutes from my home and 10 minutes from my workplace. And it is a completely uplifting experience every time I go there. It is, of course, a very humbling thing, and a thing that reminds you that there are people who are deeply excluded from the world in which many of us live, and all of us as journalists are functioning. Leveson should recommend many of the people and institutions that have been before him to find a way of allowing their staff to get stuck into the real world. It will vastly improve and deepen their journalism. We journalists are not a breed apart. We must be of the world we report. The hacking scandal reveals an echelon of hacks who removed themselves from the world in which the rest of us live. They took some weird pleasure in urinating on our world. So what now? As we look at this wonderful new media world in which there are ever more people of every age who need and search out what we do, online, on air, the driver is the ever-expanding hunger for news and information. We can count on it. We can invest in it. We have to hold our nerve, and we have to be open with the world about what we're doing. We will survive by doing it better and in concert with our customers and anyone else. If we fail them, they will leave us, and that's the market. If we get it right, they will join us in ever greater numbers. The money will most assuredly follow the numbers. If it doesn't, we really have seen the birth of a new capitalism. As never before, rafts of new journalists are emerging from our colleges and universities. The human potential is as vast as the technological. We are well placed to seize this golden age. Let's go for it.